friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Sunny Studios' Best Fishes and Tropical Scenes. So I've stamped out all my images with Lawn Fawn jet black ink on some Nina Solar White cardstock, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm starting with my blowfish, and for him I wanted kind of a golden yellow color. So I'm using Y21, Y26, and Y28. I started with that Y28 and laid in some shadows just on the top half of his body right now and on his fins, and then blended that out with the Y26, and then I'm filling in the rest of that space with the Y21, kind of lighten things up. Then for the underside of his body, I'm going to add in Y35 and Y32. So I use a little Y35 at the back and then blended toward the front with the Y32. And then I did go back in with a little Y26 because there wasn't quite enough contrast. And then I blended that back out with the Y35 and the Y32. For his spikes, I'm using my darkest shade, the Y28, and I'm just going to go in and quickly fill those in, both the ones that are on the top of his body and then the few that are on the bottom as well. I'm also going to use those shades to color in the coral at the bottom. I'm using the Y32, Y35, and the Y26, so it's the combo that I used on the bottom of the blowfish. So I'm using this to color in kind of the shorter stubby coral in the center there, and I'm just using the Y26 to lay in some shadow on the bottom and left side, and then also accentuate the little opening, and then blending out with the Y35, and then I'll fill in with the Y32. I wanted to have kind of all of the brighter colors that I'll use on the fish and critters also represented in the coral. So for the two clownfish, I'm using YR04, YR07, and YR09 for their orange stripes and all of their fins. I laid the shadow in from the underside of their body coming up with that YR09. And then I'm going to pull that color upward with the YR07, and then the lightest shade will be the YR04. I just thought that makes the most sense, since even though they're far from the surface, the light is coming from above, so that's where their highlight should be. And then the second clownfish, I'm going to color exactly the same, just flipping his shading to the right-hand side onto his face. So I decided to skip that on screen to save you some time in the video, but I am going to color in some of these corals down below, just adding a little light shading wherever I can, using the very tip of that marker to get into those small areas so that I can squeeze all three shades onto there. And I'm going to do one on the left hand side, and then I will do some on the right hand side off screen. I'm moving on to my hammerhead shark, and for him I'll use C0, C1, C3, and C5. I'm just using those darkest three shades for the top half of his body. So the C1, C3, and C5. I'm laying in some shadows with that darkest color along the bottom of the gray part of his body, and then also on his tail and fins. And then I will blend that out with the C3. I'm still sticking pretty close to the edge of each of those areas because I want there to be a strong highlight. So I'll go in with that C1 and fill the rest of that area in. And then for the white parts of his body, I'm going to just use the lightest two shades. So the C1 will be my shadowed color. So I'm going to lay in a little light shading with that, just real soft, mostly on the underside of his body where there would be more shadow because both of his fins are kind of hanging down there, but also a little bit on either side of his face. And then I'm softly blending that out with the C0. To get that to fade even more into the white, I'm going to grab my colorless blender and just go over the very edge of that C0. And then I will also use the C1 to add a little shading to the white stripes on both of my clownfish. For my hermit crab, I'm going to use R24, R29, and R39. So again, he's got those tiny skinny little legs, so there's not a whole lot of room there. So I'm going to use the very tip of my marker and some light strokes to just get some of that shadow in there with that R39. And then I'll bring in the R29 and fill in the rest of his legs. I'm going to still save a little bit of room on his claws and definitely on his face for that R24 so that area stays nice and bright. And then I will move down and color in some of the coral with those shades as well. And just like I did with the orange, I'll show you one of them on screen, and then I'll skip forward and do some more off screen. So I'm just using the same method again, just very thin little strokes, trying to squeeze all three of those colors in, but I don't want things to get too dark. I definitely want there to be room for that highlight shade. So just a few little shadows here and there. There's really no, particular method, just wherever I think they should go, mostly on the underside or the inside of each of those little stalks or branches or whatever you want to call them. I decided that my blowfish was looking a little dull in comparison to the other critters, so I went in with the Y13 and just brush some of that over to brighten it up, and I did that on the coral down below as well. And then I'm moving on to my starfish and the anemone down there. I'm going to use V20, V22, V25, and V28. So I laid in the V28 first, and then I'm blending that out with the V25, trying to keep the center nice and bright. I added a little V22 and then filled in the rest with the V20. And then for the anemone, I'm going to start with that V28 down on the bottoms of a lot of these little strands and just doing kind of an upward flicking motion, making sure to add some dark areas in the center as well. And then I'm going to pull that out with the V25. And I'm just going to keep getting softer and softer as I get toward the tips of each of those arms, since a sea anemone is actually an animal and not a plant. So there's a little aquarium trivia for those who may not have known. Moving on to my greens, I'm using YG13, YG17, and G46 for my seaweed. And I'm just going to add a little bit of that G46, that darkest shade, to each of the bottom edges of those little scallops on the leaves. And hopefully this will help them look as if they're in motion, kind of just swaying with the ocean water breeze. I don't know if you call it a breeze, but whatever, the currents, there you go. So then I'm going to begin to blend that out with the YG17, just pulling a little bit of that color towards the top of each of those little sections, and then I'll go back and fill in the white spaces with the YG13. And then just as I did with the corals, I will do the other two sea plants over on the right hand side off screen, just to save you guys some time. So we only have 2 corals left, and even though they are not looking like they are the same species of coral, since they have different looks to them, I just decided to do them both in this combo, which is RV13, RV14, and RV17. Since I had multiple of each of the other colors on the card, I thought it would look odd to have just one of each. So I just decided to do them both in the same. So I used the RV17 as my darkest, blended out with the RV14, and then filled in with the RV13. And then I can move on to my hermit crab's shell. I'll be using E50, E51, E53, and E55. starting with the E51 and the E50 to just do some light shading. And I'm just doing that from the bottom right and then separating each of those sections. Then I'm going to go in with my darkest shade, that E55, and just draw in some different spots as if you would normally see on a conch shell. And then I'll go over the edges of those with the E53 to kind of soften it into the rest of the shell. And once I've finished that, I'm also going to take these shades and do the sand down below. So I'm going to start with that E55 and I'm going to come down a little bit and also add kind of a little bit of shadow to the underside of all of those images. So all of the rocks and the anemones, anything like that that's kind of drawn in there, I'm going to go around and just outline with that E55. So I'm going to continue filling that in, just making sure to get in between all of those little plants and corals, and do that carefully so that I don't accidentally get any of that brown on that really pretty bright color. And then once I have that all filled in, I will bring in the E53 and begin to blend that out toward the bottom. Now I did get a little bit sloppier when I went around the stones, and I did that purposefully because I didn't mind if there got some brown on the stones, because that just kind of adds to their personality, the texture. Rocks have all different shades in them, so I didn't mind at all if I got some of the brown in there. In fact, I let that happen sometimes. So those were the only things. I didn't want it on any of the bright colors, but on the stones it was fine. So once I have the E53 all laid in and have blended that E55 out, now I'm taking in the E51 and just blending the edge of the E53. And then down below, I'm just going to finish everything with that E50. So I let that dry for maybe a minute, and then I went back in with my E53 and E57 and added some dot details so that it would have that sandy texture and look like little grains that the sand is made up of. So I'm using that E55 first to just add some different size dots here and there, really wherever I think they should go. There's no particular placement here. And then I will add the E53 in next. I am concentrating it a little bit more in the darker areas and then getting a little bit more sparse when I get down toward the lighter areas. Next, I'm moving on to E43, E44, and E47, and I'm going to do about half of the stones. So I'm taking that E47 and just doing a quick shadow on the bottom right, and then I'm blending that out with the E44, and I'll finish with the E43. On some of the larger rocks, I just added an extra little bit of shading where I thought it would go, where it's kind of bumped out. So I did a few in that combo and then kind of stepped back and took another look and decided that I wanted a couple more in this darker beige brown tone. So I just finished those off, and then I'm going to add a few more grains of sand with some of these shades as well, just to kind of fill that in and give it even more texture. Then for the rest of the rocks, I'm going to move on to some warm grays. I'm using W1, W3, and W5. Again, doing my shading on the bottom right, blending toward the top left. So I use the W3 as the mid-tone and then finish with the W1. And then I decided to take my Sakura black jelly roll pen and go over the eyes of the critters. So I'm dotting it on the critters who just have a little dot for the eyes. So all of them except for the blowfish and the hammerhead shark. For those, I'm going to be a little bit more careful and try to just do the black areas. On the blowfish, it kind of got away from me a little bit, so I'm going to end up just filling those in, and then I'll come back and add the whites back in with a white gel pen later on. I just wanted the black to completely dry before I even tried to attempt that, and then I will trim all of these images out with the matching dies. For my background, I'm taking a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and I've put that down on my Waffle Flower mini media mat, and I am blending a large circle in the center with some Peacock Feathers Distress Oxide ink. Then I'm going to bring in Mermaid Lagoon, and I'm going to try to halo that, just coming in from the outside edges and then making sure that it blends smoothly with that Peacock Feathers where the two overlap. I am going to have to go back and forth and work to blend those just a little bit more because the darker color is kind of eating into that Peacock Feathers just a little bit. But first I just want to make sure to cover all of that white space with the Mermaid Lagoon. And it's taking a little while to build up that color because I'm using brand new blending foams. If you watched my last video with my new blending foam storage solution, you saw that I switched out all of my blending foam, so I'm starting brand new. So none of these were inky anymore. So now I'm going back to that Peacock Feathers like I mentioned and just adding that so it stands out nice and dark again against that Mermaid Lagoon. And then to deepen everything up, I'm going to bring in Chip Sapphire from the outside edges and just, blend that on. And again, I will have to go back to my Mermaid Lagoon and just make sure everything is nice and smooth, get those transitions, so that they just flow nicely from one to the next. But that's the thing about distress inks, whether it be the regular or the oxides. The colors just look so much better and your blends are so much better the more ink you add. Now with the oxides, I do think there's a point where you can't really add anymore. It just gets oversaturated and it's just sitting on the paper, especially with the Bristol Smooth Surface because it takes a while to let that ink absorb, which is what allows you to get those nice blends because they sit on the surface so that they can work together even longer. I think, a few times back and forth is always a good thing with any kind of distress ink. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to grab my distress sprayer and add some spritzes of water. Now I have to say, I don't know what's going on with my distress sprayer, but I keep getting giant blobs and I'm not really loving it. So I may have to stop using this and use something else instead. It didn't used to do this and I've tried cleaning it out, so I'm not sure what's going on, but I kind of like a little bit of a smaller droplet, so it is what it is. I added a little bit of Peacock Feathers onto my work surface and I'm watering that down and doing a little splatter detail just to kind of hide some of those larger spots and push them into the background. And I'm going to do the same with the Chip Sapphire, adding some of those darker droplets as well. I'm just doing whatever I can to just add some interest into the background. And like I said, minimalize some of those larger drops. I am going to try to do some water splatter with my paintbrush, hoping that I can get some smaller droplets instead of those larger ones. And that worked pretty well. So once I'm happy with this, I will set it aside to dry. I did blot some of that up because I didn't want too much. I just wanted a little bit of texture there. Once it had dried completely, I die cut it with the Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle stackables. And now I'm going to stamp my sentiment with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And I'm using the sentiment that says Best Fishes. And I did stamp that down twice to get a really bold impression, but then you do have to be careful not to smudge that because it will stay wet on top of that oxide ink for a little while. Then I'm moving on to my card base. I'm using Lawn Fawn Moonstone cardstock and Blue Jay ink, and I'm stamping Have a Jawsome Birthday with another shark and a little lobster and this starfish once again. So then I will take that focal panel and I'm going to add some liquid glue to the back of that and adhere that to the front of my card base. Just making sure that the outside edges are lined up nice and straight. And it was a little bit longer on one side, so I just adjusted it to the right hand side, and I will trim off that leftover strip of blue cardstock with a pair of scissors. And then I can grab my coral reef. I've added some foam tape to the back of that, so I'll peel off all of those release papers, and then I'm going to line that up at the bottom of the card and pop that down into place. And then I can begin to adhere my images. I've added foam tape to most of those as well. So I'm going to start with my hammerhead shark. Since he's kind of the star of the show, he's going to go right in the center of the card. Kind of his fin is kind of pointing toward the sentiment, and then his tail is coming down toward the coral. So I'm just kind of nestling him right in that space there. And then I'll add the blowfish over on the top left. So he's kind of looking at his friend. And around him, I'm going to place the clownfish. So I'll put one down below toward the coral reef. And then I'm going to put the other one up above the sentiment, kind of blocking that in. And then I've got my little hermit crab. He's going to go down below. So he's just getting some liquid glue because I wanted there to just be one level of foam tape on the card to make it nice and easy for mailing. And the starfish is going to go over on the left-hand side. So I'm going to take some of these little clear bubbles, and I have them in two different sizes. So I'm pouring those into my Twiddler's Nook embellishment tray. And then I started by adding the glue directly to the card, and you can see I had a big blob here. So I'm scooping that off with a piece of cardstock, and then I'm going to wipe that spot up with a baby wipe. I don't know if it's because it's summer or what, but I have been having such bad luck with glue lately. But anyway, I decided to just leave that blob on the cardstock, and instead I'm going to dip these little clear bubbles into that glue and add them onto the card that way, just picking them up with my Studio Katia embellishment wand. So I'm going to continue adding these on the card until I've got them everywhere that I think that they should go. And because I've got that one level of foam tape going on as well, they're kind of at the same height as that, so it should still be okay for mailing, although I may just give this one to my brother next time his birthday runs around, since he loves sharks so much. So I may just hang on to this one and hand deliver it. But I was really excited to see this set and then get it and play with it, because you don't see hammerhead sharks that often in stamp form. And even though sharks aren't really my thing, they're more my thing because they're my brother's thing, and by extension my family's thing. My kids are also shark obsessed because of my brother. But if I had to pick one shark, I would pick hammerheads, because I just think they're a little more comical looking and a little less scary. And this guy is definitely less scary. He's super cute with his little smile. So now that I've got all of those placed, I will pick that up and lift it to the camera so you can see all of that detail. And even though it's a little milky underneath those right now, it will dry crystal clear. There's another peek at the inside, and that is going to complete my card for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new videos every Monday and Friday. And if you can't wait that long, here are 2 extra videos I thought might also interest you. You can click on either one of those to check them out. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.